Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Steppingstones to effective Microsoft Enterprise Agreement renewals. My name is Karl O'Doherty. I'm a principal Microsoft licensing consultant here at version 1. I have just over 16 years working within the area of particularly around Microsoft software licensing. At version 1, my role is working with our customers to help them understand what their Microsoft license position is, helping them to construct Microsoft licensing solutions, engaging with customers and supporting them around Microsoft contract and negotiations. And then where customers are in the distressed position of being faced with a software vendor audit, working in the area of software vendor audit defense, including policy and procedure design. So today's presentation, or webinar, should I say, we're going to look at a couple of key areas. First of all, we're going to look at this concept of building your team, why it's important to include a broad set of skills within your project team as a part of the enterprise agreement renewal process. Then we're going to go and look at the second phase, which is going to talk about preparing and planning. So allowing your team enough time to understand your current Microsoft estate from a deployment perspective, contractually and commercially. So what does that timeline look like? And then we're going to talk about the actual negotiation itself. I'll say that there's a little bit more than just price at stake. So we'll also look at what else can you benefit from and how do you negotiate to your advantage. So to set the scene, first of all, we're going to talk a little bit around what are the common Microsoft negotiation mistakes. So the first one I think a lot of customers fall into that trap of is around not having data-driven decisions at the foundation of your negotiation. So in layman's terms, this really refers to the fact that a lot of organizations don't fully understand what software have they deployed within their environment. How is that software being used? Where is it deployed? Who's using it? How is it being, how is it going to be used into the future? In many cases, organizations don't have automated tooling to gather the right level of information. So some of this stuff is just managed on spreadsheets and in people's heads. So not having data-driven decisions really does put you on the back foot in terms of developing an effective negotiation strategy. Starting the commercial conversation too late in the renewal cycle. So I've seen both customers and Microsoft alike start that commercial conversation too late in the renewal cycle. The longer you leave it, the more difficult it is to implement commercial terms that are more advantageous than if you have the right level of runway to understand exactly what your needs, requirements are, and how to optimize that commercial conversation with Microsoft. So starting early is a trap that a lot of organizations fall into. Failing to engage at the right level within Microsoft, right? So some people just assume that you speak to your account manager, or maybe you have some sort of relationship with a technical stakeholder who will pay a visit from time to time to pitch the benefits of certain products. So it's really good to understand exactly who's in your Microsoft virtual team and what levels of authority do those individuals have, what motivates those individuals, because each individual will have certain levels of empowerment, which we'll get into in a bit of detail in this presentation. Next one is a lot of organizations are influenced by heavy discounts on non-strategic products. So you'll often see particular new and emerging products being placed in a enterprise agreement renewal to drive overall discount or specific discounts. That can be quite advantageous, but if it's not properly planned for, that creates shelfware, which ultimately increases your total cost of ownership. The second last one then is around not having a clearly defined negotiation strategy that includes relevant key performance indicators. So as a part of any negotiation with any vendor, we would always recommend having a clearly defined set of KPIs as a part of that negotiation process so that you can cross-reference and refer back to see what you've been successful in achieving and what's the commercial impact of those KPIs to the business. And then the final one is around failure to maximize concession requests. So a lot of organizations fail to realize that Microsoft do have a certain level of flexibility in terms of what they can and can't do with their contract stack. Just because it's on Microsoft paper does not necessarily mean that there aren't concessions available to how you use their technology or how you work within the licensing program, as in this case, the enterprise agreement. So really, that's where the KPI piece comes into play, and understanding what are those KPIs that you need to include, and what are those concession requests that may have a commercial or operational benefit for your organization. So the next slide, really, this is what I would call a very common and risky approach we see with a lot of organizations who fail to invest the right people, process, and tools into the enterprise agreement renewal lifecycle. So you'll often see this with a lot of organizations that the renewal or the management of the renewal will in some cases fall onto one single individual, which is the worst case scenario, or it could be, two individuals. But for the purpose of an example, we look at this individual. Usually this poor person sits somewhere in IT, and they're lumped with the task of managing the enterprise agreement renewal. There's quite a lot of plates to spin in regards to a Microsoft Enterprise Agreement renewal. If it's done properly, you've got to look at the contract stack, the various different contractual elements of the enterprise agreement itself. You've got to understand what your effective license position is in detail, so you understand what exactly should go into your bill of materials, and what what you need to true up on, or what you need to license moving forward into the future. Forecasting for requirements is also a key element, and particularly as we move into a more cloud-first world, accurately forecasting needs is essential for organizations as a part of their enterprise agreements, so that they're not signing up for online services that might not actually be required over the duration of the agreement or the forthcoming year. And then negotiation planning. This individual will probably have some idea of, okay, I'm going to go in and negotiate with Microsoft, and what success looks like for me is a certain level of points discount. And then it's, if I attain that, well, that's a job well done. But what you tend to find is that, trying to spin all of these plates is a pretty difficult task for just one individual or even a couple of individuals to manage effectively. You may find that they get some support from legal, but ultimately legal may just say, well, this is on Microsoft's paper, so there's nothing to see here. We're not going to get the level of flexibility we may traditionally get dealing with a smaller vendor. And again, finance may be just as happy with, well, if you can get a couple of points discount on this, we're happy to cut a check, but just ask the question. So there's never really any great detail goes into, what's the economic impact of additional concessions that could be sought, that could be used to reduce TCO into the future. What ends up happening to this individual is, as you go through the renewal process, the road starts to get bumpy. You've got data collection requirements to work through. You've got to understand what the license position is. You're trying to make you can't make head or tail of what's in the actual contract stack, because you might not necessarily be a licensing expert. You've also then got to work with different individuals in the business trying to understand forecasting, and then you've got to come up with some sort of a negotiation strategy with Microsoft and trying to understand what are the leverage points that you can use to be successful in that area. Over the duration of the coming months, what ends up happening is some of those plates start to spin a little bit awkwardly and eventually just crack and fall on the ground. And what actually ends up happening to this individual is, in more cases than not, is that they start to leverage the assistance of third parties, which could be their reseller or it could be Microsoft themselves, to help drive the renewal of the enterprise agreement itself. That's fine, and don't get me wrong, I think in some cases, some resellers have got some great insights and expertise, having fulfilled enterprise agreements over the last 20 years or so since the agreement has been launched. But I always would stress that having individuals who have a commercial interest in you renewing the agreement for certain products, or renewing an agreement with a certain mix of products, might not be advantageous, and as a result you may not get a licensing structure that is best fit for your organization, and you may get blindsided by specific deals or offerings that might not align with actually what your business requirements are. So in that scenario, a lot of what we'll talk about in the duration of this presentation will somewhat go out the window, because ultimately you're being guided by those that may have a commercial interest in you renewing in a specific type of way. So what's the best practice? So we always say it's really important to build a team that includes a blend of skill sets within the organization that will strengthen your technical, operational, and commercial decision-making capabilities. So what this team looks like is, you don't want to make it too big, because obviously if it gets too noisy, it gets too complicated and difficult to run with. But ideally what you want to have is key IT stakeholders, some form of legal representation, finance and procurement, especially if you've got some dedicated procurement function for software or ICT, and then executive sponsorship. You also want to identify as a part of that team who are your commercial and technical sponsors within Microsoft. So who are those individuals that you need to include within the renewal cycle as early as possible to help drive the KPIs that you will define as you work through your negotiation strategy. Reseller input is also important, right? They know quite a lot about your licensing contracts and what you've purchased and how you need to purchase into the future. So there's still an important element there to be fulfilled by the licensing reseller, particularly when we get into the scenarios where you're trying to model out various different cost options and so forth. So the reseller can be quite useful in that context. And then for those folks that don't necessarily have the internal licensing capabilities themselves to run with a project like this, always good to have some form of external support if there's a skills gap internally. Microsoft licensing is a dark art, and navigating the choppy waters of an enterprise agreement can be quite difficult for many organizations. So leveraging external support can be hugely beneficial and drive significant cost savings on renewal. And as you can see, don't be this guy in the corner going it alone, reading the Microsoft licensing for dummies upside down. So identifying commercial and technical Microsoft sponsors. So what we have here is just a summary of quick tips in terms of what you can do to help understand who it is within Microsoft that you're engaging with, who's in that virtual team of Microsoft stakeholders that you should include within your overall enterprise agreement negotiation team. So as you go through the renewal process, you'll probably find that various different individuals from Microsoft will be airdropped into the conversations or into meetings. They may have a specific purpose to fulfill certain products or drive certain products. They may serve a particular commercial support, or they may provide a commercial support function, or they may be your account manager, or their manager or their manager's manager. So you'll find that as you go through the renewal cycle, particularly in the run up to renewal, you'll probably see various different fresh faces from Microsoft engage with your organization, as well as those that you're more familiar with working with on an ongoing basis. So it's really good to understand who are those individuals, catalog all the stakeholders that you engage with, research their background on LinkedIn, see what's their job title. Look at their job title on Google and see, have similar jobs been advertised in the past. That'll give you a sense of their seniority levels, what motivates them as well, which is hugely important, because at the end of the day, everybody wants to negotiate a deal that's mutually beneficial to all parties. And so sometimes having an understanding as to what motivates those Microsoft stakeholders is really important, because just by including certain products or driving certain consumption levels, that can have an impact on the overall commercial terms that are being offered. So getting an understanding of those job titles and job descriptions is really key. Simple one, request an org chart for key stakeholders so you understand exactly who is it within the organization you're engaging with. Are you engaging with the right level based on the size and spend of your organization? Or is there an opportunity to have some form of executive sponsorship engagement within Microsoft, who in turn will engage with executives within your own organization to champion your cause as a part of the renewal process? So seniority levels, as I mentioned there, looking at what is the purpose of that individual that you're working with. Are they working in sales? Do they work in a sales support function? Are they working within the corporate structure within Microsoft? And then also, as I said, look at what motivates those individuals. So what are the key things that are driving those individuals that you're engaging with in Microsoft? Is it revenue? Is it consumption? Is it the inclusion of strategic products or products that they're looking to seed the market with? Or if you've got a good, deep relationship with your account manager, what other scorecard items are they focused on this year, and how can you help them? In some cases where there's alignment, that can be quite useful for organizations in terms of being able to drive those preferential terms as a part of the renewal process. So timing and approach, I think timing is key when it comes to the enterprise agreement, because from my experience, they never really run as smoothly as you would think they would on paper. So getting started early, getting to grips with all the different key components of what needs to be done during that renewal cycle is hugely important. Leaving it till the last minute is going to put you on the back foot. You're not going to have a deep understanding of what it is your actual software requirements are. If you've got compliance issues, you may be exposed and not having the necessary time to manage those and right size those potential issues. If you're being positioned, or if new technology is being positioned to your organization, by not fully understanding, the impact of that technology, and do you have the capability to roll out that new technology over the coming years, is going to impact on the total cost of ownership of licensing within your enterprise agreement. So at a start, and this is for your average size organization, I'd say, give or take about 2,000 or so users. But these fundamentals can be applied to larger and smaller organizations. Larger organizations may even want to start earlier than the 6-month period. But just on average, this is what we would typically recommend the approach that organizations take from a timing perspective. So first thing is looking at building the team. So start building that team 6 months out. Really important that you get that team in place and that everybody is aware of their roles, responsibilities, and what it is that you're trying to achieve, and what is the timeline to achieve that within. The contract analysis piece, so looking at the Microsoft contract stack, which I'll talk about in a second, is key. So getting an understanding of your existing contract stack and getting a glimpse in terms of what the future contract stack is hugely important. That can start to feed into your negotiation strategy and developing those KPIs early in terms of what's material for your business. So 4 months out, you want to have your effective license position bottomed out. What's your gap analysis? What have you consumed? What have you deployed? How does that stack up against what you've been purchasing? Are there any gaps in the on-premise world for software where you may have actually deployed more than you're using? Or have you a situation where perhaps you have cloud services that you're under consuming, or that there's an opportunity to reprofile or right size those online services to reduce cost. So getting that effective license position bottomed out within 4 months is key, and that lays the foundation for, as I kind of touched on there, right sizing and optimizing. So you want to understand again how you can use those data driven insights to your advantage. So is it end of life software that can be removed? Is there consolidation opportunities for on-premise technology that may be moving to the cloud? If you're moving to the cloud, what's the cost implication of that going to be? Are there any cloud licensing pathways included within your Microsoft license entitlement? So things like Azure Hybrid Benefit, for example, how can they be better optimized as a part of the enterprise agreement renewal process to drive down Azure consumption costs? Have you potentially legacy licensing issues there that need to be managed out? So being able to optimize and right size well in advance of constructing a bill of materials is really important. Also important is this concept of building an internal roadmap. So the internal roadmap, really what you're looking at here is trying to understand the technologies that you've included within your enterprise agreement and any net new technologies that you're looking to potentially include. When do you propose deploying those technologies over the next 3, and even if you can go beyond the next 3 to 4 or 5 years? What we would recommend is looking at that roadmap then and trying to benchmark that against what Microsoft's estimated roadmap for new product releases look like. The key thing in doing that is that by having an alignment of your internal roadmap with the Microsoft roadmap, you can have a better understanding of where it may make sense to take a holiday from software assurance or support and maintenance, where products may not necessarily be refreshed for a period of time. Don't get me wrong, that might not fit in all cases, because you've got enhanced product use rights with software assurance as well that you need to be aware of. So just by removing support maintenance from certain products just because you're not going to deploy them, that can create compliance issues. So just tread carefully with that one. But I think what can be quite relevant here, the internal roadmap concept is, if putting net new product into the Microsoft Enterprise Agreement, is there a risk that you're signing up to technology that you may not actually get around to deploying for 2 years, or even worse, in year 3 of the agreement, or even worse than that, you may not actually ever get around to deploying within the lifespan of the next contract cycle. So that internal roadmap is key. It gives you an understanding of where that waste may be created, or where there's right sizing and optimization opportunities out there within your licensing position. It also can be used as a driver in terms of talking to Microsoft and saying, right, okay, well look, we really like these new technologies, but from an operational point of view, we're just not going to get the time to implement these technologies within a reasonable time span. And so our concern is that if we invest in whatever the technology is, there's a risk that that's just going to sit on a shelf for the next 12 to 18 months or longer. So are there value added initiatives to help us drive that adoption? And I know depending on what Microsoft partner you work with, there's various different programs out there that can help drive adoption of net new technology. And then finally, 3 months out again, agreeing the negotiation strategy. This is something that you want to start to chip away at as you go. Really, to be fair, so constructing the KPIs isn't something that you just sit down and build once you've done your internal roadmap, you're optimizing, your right sizing, your effective license position. Really, the negotiation strategy, you start to bake that out as soon as you start to build a team and start looking at the contract stack. Because the negotiation strategy, depending on how much complexity is in there, that's something that you may want to phase in terms of your requests, because there may be operational bottlenecks associated with some of the requests that you need to make. And that, once they've been bottomed out, that acts as the foundation to seek further concessions. So that negotiation strategy, having that, locked down earlier than the 3 months is good, but having a final negotiation strategy 3 months out is probably where most organizations would want to be. And then from there, obviously, you enter into the negotiation cycle with Microsoft and start to work back on the KPIs that you've included. I guess, as you'll find when you go through a number of these enterprise agreement renewals, you won't get everything you ask for, but you'll definitely get a certain number of those concessions. And that's why I think, coming back to our original point, it's really important that customers take the time to understand what those potential concessions may look like, and to go beyond just looking for single point discount or points discount on particular products. So the typical negotiation approach. So a lot of organizations that I talked to or I've worked with in the past have found that the majority of them have focused on a couple of key things. One is always focused on the concept of an upfront discount. So getting points discount for a particular product or all products, generally that's linked to getting a deal done on time with certain products included, perhaps. They may be strategic products to Microsoft or the customer alike, but primarily the negotiation can be very much focused on price and price only. But I think you need to look beyond that, and that's where I think this concept of looking at the Microsoft contract stack and getting a deeper understanding of the implications of that stack on your organization, as well as the Microsoft product use rights for the technology that you're going to license. How does that impact on what type of concessions or amendments should you seek from Microsoft? So you can see here there's quite a variety of them. On average, I think when we bake out an initial set of KPIs for a customer, there's close to probably around 50 or so individual negotiation points that you may want to include within your enterprise agreement renewal. So I'm going to touch on some of these right now. Things like the audit request or audit management is a key one. So Microsoft include a license verification clause within their enterprise agreements. The clause itself can be quite risky for certain organizations, particularly if there's a risk that there's going to be merger, acquisition, or divestiture within your organization. There's always a heightened risk that your organization will be audited post divestiture or M&A, or perhaps in the middle of it. So if you've got that visibility of potential changes in organizational structure, you may want to look for an amendment of the license verification clause so that you're not impacted from an operational point of view by having to complete a Microsoft audit with a third-party auditor during or post M&A, which can create unforeseen difficulties for organizations regardless of their license compliance position. Some customers also might just like the idea of having a relaxation of that clause because of the fact that they've invested significantly in software asset management over the years, and that their posture is quite good when it comes to validating their license position. So that may be something that they want to push back on Microsoft, given the investment that they've made. Multi-year discount, so that's just getting a year one discount, getting those discounts over multiple years. You want to focus on shelfware elimination, as I talked about, so trying to understand exactly what technology might not be the right fit for your business, and where can that be eliminated from the enterprise agreement, because otherwise you're just going to end up paying for that for 3 years and it's just going to sit on a shelf. Strategic products, as I mentioned, are key, right? So understanding not only what products are strategic to your business, but are they also strategic to Microsoft, and what's the impact of including those products in the enterprise agreement? Can they drive more favorable terms in the overall agreement, or can they drive enhanced discounts, be that standard discounts or perhaps custom discounts from Microsoft? Enhanced cloud benefits. So depending on your adoption of cloud technologies, obviously within O365 or Office 365, there's some licensing gotchas around mixing tiers. Maybe that's something you want to look for some sort of a clarification from Microsoft around, so that you're not going to fall afoul of the licensing terms. Or things like Azure Hybrid Benefit. Is hybrid benefit really critical to your business? Is the long-term guarantee of that benefit important to your business? Because if it was taken away, that could have a significant impact on your Azure consumption costs. So perhaps that's something you want to look for, some enhanced benefit or clarification around the usage of those cloud services within your organization. Other things in there, cloud incentives. So Microsoft quite keen to seed the market with their cloud technologies, and there's various incentives and funding buckets, if you will, for customers to drive cloud adoption. Enhanced use rights on Microsoft products. Depending on your size and structure, you might have a particular nuance in the Microsoft licensing terms that you need to have an amendment on. Probably trickier to get in a lot of cases, but never say never. So that may be something you want to look at. LSP incentives. So depending on your reseller, they may have incentives from Microsoft, and that could be another touch point that you want to use to see how can you leverage those incentives that Microsoft pay your reseller to drive down your TCO. Is your reseller prepared to perhaps share some of those incentives in the form of rebates or some other value-added type program? So worth exploring again. So as I said, on average, we find somewhere between 50 and up to 70 negotiation focus areas within the Microsoft contract stack, and when looking at Microsoft licensing terms and product use rights and so on top of discount. I would say that on average, a poorly thought out enterprise agreement renewal process will probably include up to about 8 negotiation focus areas, if that. That's probably being generous. A lot of it with the time will come back to probably 1 or 2, and obviously, as we've discussed, a lot of it does just focus on price and discount. But you need to get a little bit deeper than that and understand what are all those potential concessions out there. How applicable are they to your organization, and what's the impact of those concessions to your organization? Because a lot of this stuff really just does fly under the radar. So really important that you take the time early and understand the impact of these potential concessions, and formulate that KPI strategy as early as you can in the renewal cycle. So the Microsoft EA negotiation key focus areas. So when doing our analysis, we typically break down this into a number of key areas. So first of all, we look at product use rights and incentives. Then we look at the MBSA to see, are there any amendments within that particular element of the contract stack. The enterprise agreement itself, are there elements in there that need to be reviewed to see, can we look for clarification, amendments, or concessions associated with that? The EA, or the server and cloud enrollment itself, and then the CSP structure. But at a high level, the core principles that you need to be guided by are A, cost reduction. So like, what are the long and short-term discount strategies that can be implemented? B is around risk management. So are there concessions that will help you mitigate potential financial and operational risk associated with how you use Microsoft technology? C is around enhanced use rights. So through the use of enhanced rights, can your organization gain a particular competitive advantage? And then on the concept of modernize, so as I mentioned before, Microsoft have various different financial supports to help drive cloud adoption. If starting to increase your cloud footprint, or starting to make those initial steps into the cloud, what support structures are available to you from Microsoft and their Microsoft Partner Channel, on the Microsoft Partner Channel, to help drive that adoption and modernize your Microsoft technology stack. So, renewal negotiation communication tips. Microsoft as you'll find is that they will use multiple entry points to understand your renewal position. Um, you'll typically find that, depending on the size and complexity of your organization, individuals within your business will be talking to various different individuals within Microsoft. And those individuals at times will be plugging to try and understand what's your renewal posture going to be. Are you going to renew on time? Any idea on how big the renewal is going to be? What new products are you going to include within the renewal? So inadvertently, Microsoft can build a picture in terms of what it is you're going to put into the enterprise agreement and when it's going to get done by, and so that can obviously impact on your leverage. So what we'd always say is, be take control of the of communications that you may have with Microsoft in advance of the renewal itself. Coming back to our point earlier on, 6 months out, building the team, defining that communication strategy is key. You want to control and limit the flow of information into Microsoft in that context, because you may have some leverage points there that could be advantageous, but giving the game away too early, you could lose that advantage. So to use the term loose lips sink ships is really key here. So the communications need to be carefully managed. Again, a top tip is when you start to get into the renewal cycle itself, I would always recommend having designated individuals communicate with Microsoft during that renewal process, so you don't have these ad hoc side conversations where information is inadvertently given away that might impact on the overall negotiation strategy. That can have a detrimental impact on what final terms you're able to achieve. I'd also say request from Microsoft to be funneled through the negotiation team. So, having that team of 4 or 5 stakeholders managing the renewal cycle with Microsoft and fielding and acting as that central point of contact for any Microsoft related questions in that renewal cycle window is key. And by doing that, you eliminate the risk of Microsoft going in and talking to stakeholders at various different levels and perhaps giving the game away too early. The concept of third-party negotiation support services is always worth looking at. Having an individual who's perhaps worked with a number of organizations to help them successfully navigate effective Microsoft Enterprise Agreement renewals can be quite useful. They'll have a depth of information and insights around having worked with a broad range of customers. So it can be quite a good way of keeping you on the straight and narrow. And then the final point, should I say, is escalation paths into Microsoft should be defined, so that you avoid any potential barriers as you start to get into the latter stages of the renewal cycle itself. So, coming back to that concept of understanding who are all of your stakeholders you're within that virtual team within Microsoft, if there is a risk that at a certain point in time, concessions may not be, or may appear that they're not going to be achievable, perhaps it's at that point that you have that executive sponsorship to be called upon to engage with their equivalents in Microsoft to help break down any barriers that may exist in terms of concessions that are being asked or discounts that we're seeking to attain. So, in conclusion, don't go it alone. I would say plan and assemble the right team early. Get started in the renewal cycle and true up cycle early. So get that planning done early. Using quality asset intelligence to make informed to make informed data-driven decisions is key. So get your effective license position done, at least, as we were saying, 4 months in advance of the renewal itself. So you have a deep understanding of what it is your licensing posture is. Building on that and trying to understand exactly what is going to be your future state requirements and how does that impact in terms of what you put into the enterprise agreement renewal itself. Being able to develop a bill of materials that's linked specifically to the needs of your organization will mitigate waste redundancy over the coming 3 years. Don't leave the negotiations until the last minute, right? it's an ongoing process. As I mentioned, you want to start building those KPIs early in the renewal cycle, and then you want to start implementing those KPIs generally on a phased basis, because you'll probably find with the right level of time and detail, there's going to be quite a lot of KPIs that you want to work through. Not all of them will be achievable, but with the right level of detail, you'll probably find that you could uplift the number of concession points that you've historically used by upwards of 30 or 40 KPIs versus what you've attained historically. And then finally, just around leveraging third-party services. So always merit in having an independent voice of reason in the conversation to help guide you successfully through that negotiation or that renewal life cycle itself. Resellers are, there's some great resellers out there. They do a good job on this. In some cases, you probably question their independence if they've got a commercial interest in terms of you renewing for certain products, because ultimately they are being paid by Microsoft to manage the enterprise agreement. So, always question the level of independence that you're going to get through the reseller channel, although the skills will be quite good. Having a third party independent voice of reason can be quite useful for organizations who really want to maximize and make sure that they're being given the best possible offer from Microsoft and the reseller channel. So to wrap things up, here's some interesting stats just based on some work that we've done over the last number of years. So typically find that 24% of Microsoft software is non-compliant within an organization. So that's a combination of breach of licensing terms, just not enough licensing to cover your usage. It could be incorrect software, incorrectly configured and whatnot. A lot of that risk is not through malicious intent. A lot of it is just driven by the fact that many organizations haven't invested in a ongoing software asset management program. And so a lot of the risk just flies, as I had said before, under the radar. What we do find, though, is 81% of that risk tends to be managed out at zero licensing costs. So that's through various different optimization techniques. So, consolidating, right sizing can be, through reconfiguration, retirement. So there's significant cost saving opportunities, even though organizations still continue to have relatively high rates of non-compliance when it comes to Microsoft licensing. And on average, we'd say by applying some of the fundamentals that we've covered off in today's presentation, we have seen cost savings attained of up to 32% on a Microsoft Enterprise Agreement renewal. That's through a combination of factors. So that can be through risk management, so through right sizing the estate where there may be potential licensing risks. It can be achieved through right sizing. So, particularly when we look at the cloud, the risk that a lot of organizations are falling into is that, they're paying for online services that they may not be consuming effectively. So there's reprofiling opportunities there across, SaaS, PaaS, and software as a service. But also, in terms of your on-prem environment, how are you operating those on-premise environments with too much licensing capacity? Is there an opportunity to remediate some of that waste and reduce that cost and eliminate it from your enterprise agreement? And then, other elements that drive those cost savings come back to good old-fashioned discount, as well as many of the concessions and amendments that we talked about today that the organizations can look to seek as a part of their enterprise agreement renewal cycle. So you can start your optimization journey today with version 1. Attendees of today's presentation have an opportunity to avail of an initial remote consultation with one of our SAM consultants. So really recommend that you take us up on that offer. It's an open dialogue where you can ask us any challenging licensing questions you may have. We'll also give some further insights into what we're seeing within the Microsoft arena around licensing, maybe some insights, best practices, tips, tricks that we can provide that you can go and bring to your organization today to help reduce costs, manage risk, and so forth. And then for organizations who want to go that step deeper and actually want to engage with us around the effective management of enterprise agreement renewal life cycles, we have a service offering called EA Assist, which is effectively designed to manage costs, control risk, improve strategic planning, and minimize the effort associated with your Microsoft license position management, and help enable timely enterprise agreement true-ups and renewals. but ultimately helping organizations guide them to a point where they're maximizing the cost benefits that they can attain through effective Microsoft Enterprise Agreement renewals and associated negotiations. So if your organization is struggling from a capacity point of view to get a handle on your enterprise agreement, or you're looking for an independent insight in terms of how you tackle your Microsoft Enterprise Agreement into the future, I highly recommend having a look at our EA Assist service, as that can be a great way to reduce cost. So thanks again for attending today's session. If anybody has any questions after the session, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact us. We'd be delighted to help you with any Microsoft licensing queries that you may have. The version 1 SAM practice is also focused on a broad range of other software vendors. So if there are other vendors that you may have some licensing challenges around, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you.